Welcome, colleagues. Our first item on the agenda is opening reflections from Jennifer King.
Thank you. In secondary RE at the moment, we're in the midst of our external examinations, so I thought it would be appropriate for us as SACRE members to reflect on the process of learning. So since becoming a SACRE member, I've really appreciated that as a group we're in a constant state of learning, and this progress towards self-improvement is what we all strive towards. So it seemed appropriate to seek advice from some of the key faiths in terms of their views on learning. In Hinduism, the Upanishads teach that humans must learn and develop holistically, intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually. Good advice for those going through examinations, remembering not to ignore the emotional and spiritual elements. Whilst in Judaism, I found some advice from an academic that my Year 9 students would love to quote back at me, that we learn when we're ready to learn, not when someone else is ready to teach. Though I would be quick to quote back the Torah, which states, education is the tree of life for the Jewish faith. The Pali Canon in Buddhism takes a more philosophical view, one of my A-level students linking it to their research of René Descartes, suggesting that we are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. In Christianity, 2 Timothy chapter 2 verse 15 tells us that we should study and show God that we understand truth. And for Muslims it is claimed, from Muhammad, peace be upon him, whoever takes a path upon which to obtain knowledge, Allah makes the path to paradise easy for him. Whilst the embodiment of Sikhism in terms of learning is found in the translation of the term Sikh, which means disciple or student. All of these are wise words not just for students being examined or for SACRE members, but wise words for everyone committed to lifelong learning. Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. That was wonderful. And I do love the reflection around the different faiths. I think we need reminding of that. Welcome, Ashley. No problem at all. I only have one apology for absence, Claire Simmons. But if anybody has any other apologies, I'm happy to take them. Gillian?
Yes, from Liz Moore. She's got a staff member off sick today, so she has to cover for them.
Thank you for that, Liz Moore. All right, colleagues. This is mainly, I think, directed towards councillors. Any declarations of members' interests, colleagues? You all look content, as my leader is in the habit of saying. We are content. If I could move to the minutes of the previous meeting of SACRE, which have been distributed. Are we still content, or any matters arising from those minutes that isn't covered by the agenda? You're all extremely well behaved. Thanks very much for that. Correspondence received by the chairman, if any, and no correspondence has been received by the chair. I move to item 6, the Lincolnshire SACRE annual report. Actually, I think you've received copies of this ad nauseum, but I'm open to any discussions and an introduction by Wendy.
Actually, that's only on there because I wasn't present at the last meeting. So it's just to say that that will be sent off to NASACA and DFE. That's already on that one. You're probably sick of seeing it by now. But it's done anyway. It's done. And very nice photographs. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you very much for that. Are we all right? We're okay? Okay, moving on then to the NASACA self-assessment tool. And that's on your agenda, pages 27 to 38.
Sorry,
Is that you, Gillian? Or is that you, Wendy? Sorry, that's you, Wendy.
Sherry and myself. Do you want to start?
Okay. Yeah. Can I? Oops. Can you hear now? Yes. Okay. Just to say thank you very, very much to Wendy for taking this to the next stage. Because obviously it was quite a large document, as we know. It covered, we felt, all the areas that were important to cover within a self-assessment of SACREs. But Wendy has very kindly taken it to this next level, streamlined it, so that we could clearly identify when we read it through this time if there were any areas that we particularly wanted to discuss further. I'll hand over to Wendy, but then what Wendy will do after our meeting today is she's going to very kindly take it away and make it into an action plan. But as I say, far easier to read through exactly what those details are. We are pleased in as much as we've identified those areas of our functioning where we think are very positive. And I think that's something for us all to celebrate. And it's also obviously provided us with identifying those areas that we want to develop. But thank you very much, Wendy, for making that even clearer. And I shall pass over to Wendy. Thank you.
Thanks, Sherry. Yeah, it was quite a cumbersome document, and I think really it was a bit of a sledgehammer to crack a nut, really, because when I went through it, I mean, you might look at this if you've just come to it new and think, is that the streamlined version? Well, yeah, it is actually. But what you have at the end of each section is a summary of what members said and where we fit best into these different categories. So, for example, section 1 was the management of SACRE in partnership with the LA and other key stakeholders. Now, the key bit for the moment is, if you turn to page 3 on your document, you'll have is everybody with me on that one? Yeah. You'll have a summary of the strengths, which include things like the fact we do fulfil legal requirements, we have regular meetings, etc., etc. But probably the most important bit in terms of an action plan is on the next page, which they refer to as barriers to success. And in a way, I don't want to sound negative, but this is the bit that we need to concentrate on, because these are the priorities we need to think about. So what came out of responses were these things. This is page 4. Limited time available, that's for me, because I have approximately 5 days a month, and that does limit what can be achieved. Any of you that do anything like this kind of work know that a day is gone, doing things like emails and admin and all that kind of thing. Another day is easily gone, preparing for SACRE, coming to a meeting, following up. The time just goes. So although we are better off than lots of other local authorities, I mean, some local authorities have no RE advisor at all, but we shouldn't, think, oh, well, we're lucky then. The other side of that is that we're still down on time, because you've got to build into that visiting schools, writing the annual report, and a load of other stuff. So there is that limited time. And then you can see from that list the things that came up. I'll just bring one or two things out. And one, for example, is a lack of meaningful links with the local authority. That we do have a local authority rep who is my line manager, but in terms of making meaningful links between her and what the priorities are in schools, for example, and SACRE, I'm not so sure. I think that's a bit wobbly, and I think it wouldn't be too difficult to strengthen that. So, for example, if it could be Jill or myself really, but if we pick up something in a school that's an issue in RE, we're not always clear about the whole picture of the school. We can look at the Ofsted report if they have one, but they do have locality leads who work in schools who we could have a stronger link with to give us a bigger picture. Or indeed, it could go the other way. If I could contact someone and say, I'm going to such and such primary school, can you give me a bit more information about the school? It wouldn't be impossible to strengthen those sorts of links. So we haven't got an action plan, so our own priorities are unclear. So that's obviously our next step. In terms of membership, we're not always able to follow vacancies up efficiently. However, that is for a number of reasons, and some of them are perfectly understandable. But certainly a detailed look at our constitution and membership needs to be on an action plan. An inadequate training programme, I think that's fair. I don't think we've got a built-in training programme that works. It's often been reactive. So, for example, we might have a new Ofsted framework and we'll say we'll do some training on that, or something new might come along, say a new report into RE. But ongoing, systematic training, I think we'd hold our hands up and say we've not been as good that as we may have been. But again, that could well, making excuses now, but that could well be linked to lack of time. I knew. Also, the point was made by at least one member, insufficient input from pupils into Sacre, and I do take that. I think that's been something we've thought about for a long time, but not really done anything about. And as has the limited number of venues for meetings, which has been on our mind, but again, we haven't really, haven't got to grips with that really. And the last one is limited information about collective worship. The responsibility of a Sacre is in relation to religious education and collective worship. And we don't give so much emphasis to collective worship. And again, it comes back to time. I seem to spend all my time looking at RE, but I put my hand up and say I don't give the time to collective worship. We don't have any determinations for collective worship. That's where a school thinks that it's inappropriate to have broadly Christian worship, and I suppose that means our eye isn't quite on the ball as much as it might have been. So that's the barriers in that one. Don't worry, they're not as long for each section. I'll go through them and then you well, actually no, does anyone want to come back any of those ones that you can see on page 4 rather than me going backwards and forwards? These are responses from members, I haven't just made these up myself. No. Hi Liz.
Mark.
I was going to say, I'll be following up later on when we're talking about the NASACA conference.
Yeah.
But one of the key things that came out of one of the inputs then was you can determine the strength of a Sacre by the quality of its link with the local authority.
Yeah.
And that was a very interesting kind of statement, and evidence was given to show that. And so, I think we should perhaps, think carefully about that. We want to be a really positive, strong, active, and worthwhile Sacre.
I do think it's becoming more and more difficult because local authorities are diminishing in size, so they haven't got the people that they used to have to make the links. I mean, we used to have regular representation here, and those people are no longer there and they weren't replaced, and so it goes on. But we should look for ways of doing that.
Just on that, is interesting, because the other point in my head is that in the old days, of course, virtually all schools had a relationship with the local education authority.
Yeah, that's right.
Now we've got academies, which is a different kettle of fish altogether. But I do note as well, we get good attendance from county councillors, who are an important part of the local authority, so that link is there. I wonder if we exploit our county councillors enough. Jack. I almost got away with that. But I think, and the other mention really was in terms of, how we engage people. So maybe we need to work more closely with our councillors as the local authority representatives are here. But broadly, should we be looking at training? Should we be looking at how we can enhance our relationship with education officers and academies? So I'm just, that was in my mind. There was another thing in there. You were talking about collective worship, Wendy, which I think is really interesting. I mean, one of the things I've tried to do, and that links into membership, is to encourage a greater diversity of faiths to join us. And I'm grateful because we've actually now got more Pentecostal links, and that happens to be Sean, but there's Ashley as well, and that's useful too, because those faith groups often don't have schools in the way that the Anglicans and the Catholics do. And so I think about the Methodists as well and the Salvation Army, so just reflecting.
I think one of the issues for collective worship, and I think Jill will back me up here, is that we've lost the interest that Ofsted had in collective worship, whereas in years gone by, Ofsted did inspect as part of SMSC collective worship. They looked at it and it was an issue of compliance, and so schools knew that they had to be doing it. Well, they don't do that now. Well, very, very rarely, not in Section 5 and Section 8 inspections. So it's possible for schools to actually break the law in that respect and get away with it, if I can put it like that. And I have heard schools, they've said it to me, well, we don't do it and it doesn't matter because nobody is bothered. So that's a tricky one for us and how we approach that. But when we come to draw up the action plan, Chris, we can think about that and how we could address it.
Yeah. And venues, do you want to do that under the action plan as well?
Sorry?
You've raised venues as a question mark, Wendy, which I agree with,
Oh yes,
by
all
the way.
these things will come up in the
With
action
that
plan.
there. Thank you. Yes, Ashley.
I wonder if I could ask a little bit more about the input from pupils. How would we be expecting to get input from pupils?
Well, some SACREs have what they call a youth SACRE that meets independently of SACRE and talks about priorities and religious education, what they've been doing, the sort of enrichment things they do in the school and so forth. Other SACREs invite pupils along to talk about RE, what happens. I mean, I was at a SACRE meeting recently where some secondary pupils came and talked about an RE week that they'd engaged in and the visitors they'd had in school and what they'd learned from it and so on. And it gave an insight for members, particularly members who hadn't been in school for a while maybe or didn't understand how the curriculum operates in school, to ask actual pupils what's going on. I can see Jill out the corner of my eye there.
Yeah, I'd just add to that. We're just entering our period of review for our locally agreed syllabus. And we very regularly speak with teachers and with school leaders. I haven't done many reviews since I've done this job, but it's not as rare in my experience to talk to young people about what their priorities are. I suspect if we had young people shaping what our syllabus looked like, we might have a greater emphasis on overarching global issues of equity and injustice, for example. So that might be one way in which we can work alongside them.
So the answer really is many and varied ways, depending on the SACRE, really. Sorry, did you want to ask some more?
So, yes, please. Yes, please. Can we have some input from pupils? I was speaking to a school yesterday for their active citizenship lesson, whatever, and they've got to do a task. They're no use to us because they're in Peterborough. So, but schools across the land must be doing this active citizenship. It strikes me it would be a relatively it would be quite neat to find some pupils who needed to do an active citizenship project and say, here you are, come and inform the local authority about RE, your experience or your aspirations.
Well, yes, as long as we recognise that citizenship is a different area on the curriculum to religious education.
No, the active citizenship project, as I understood it, and I might not have understood it, but the students were being told, get involved in running. I mean, one of them said he was going to follow up with the Environment Agency about rubbish in the river. Somebody else was going to go and speak to a councillor about the skate park. Yeah. The next one could easily come here and tell us how we feel about RE.
Exactly.
Thanks for that.
When we draw up the
Ashley,
action plan, sorry,
and Cherry's indicating as well.
Just to say that all of this will be included in the action.
Yeah, I don't want to get too much into the detail of the action plan, really.
But I think the comments, Ashley's comments are really very helpful.
Yeah.
And I think every one of us, particularly those people who are privileged to have been in education and still spend time in education, deeply humbled when young people are able to discuss things with us, to give their opinion, to talk about what their hopes are, and to actually also showing their knowledge and their understanding. And I think actually it's a great idea, and I think we will have people involved. But as I say, I promise it will be in the action plan.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
And just if I could say, because you did impress your thing, so I don't know if it could. So Cherry was saying that these things will be involved in the action plan, and welcomed Ashley's contribution. And I think you're encouraging other contributions ahead of the action plan, including Ashley's. So thank you for that.
Okay. Well, section 2 is on standards and quality of provision of religious education. And if you go on to look at page 6, you'll see there that what the strengths are the information that's provided to SACRE, such as exam data, analysis of Ofsted and SAMS reports, etc. Advisors work well with subject leaders and so on. But the barriers to our success come back, I mean, you will see some repetition here, obviously, because there's overlap. The barriers are the funding and advisor time. I can only speak myself here, really, but I've got a good knowledge of a number of schools, but only limited hours available to carry much more than a light touch, because it's just impossible to do more than that in the time that I've got. The local authority does charge schools if I go in for a significant length of time. So that's also a barrier to some schools. And SACRE doesn't receive information about schools from the local authority. That's what I was referring to earlier, that we don't get much information about schools apart from the Ofsted reports. And that's one of the reasons I do the analysis of reports, so that you get a bit of a picture about what's going on in schools. So that's...
Sorry, could I just ask something there? So forgive the interruption. You wouldn't get it from the local authority, though. You'd get it from the academies, surely. A secondary school where this, you know.
Well, we could get information about schools from the local authority, because I was talking to Jill Chandonnaire, who's my line manager, and she said it is possible, but they have locality leads who go into schools. That's mainly that's non-academy schools, and they draw up reports highlighting strengths and weaknesses of that school. So supposing advisor A goes into a school and finds that RE is a weakness, there ought to be a system whereby she can feed that back to us, and the other way, if you like. But at the moment, it's a bit hit and miss, and it happens kind of by accident sometimes. So I don't think it's actually that difficult to do. It's just that we haven't got a system in place to do it. But I think it's possible. Academy is a bit more tricky, because we haven't got, obviously, the LA hasn't got, we haven't got a link there, but we'd be more inclined to do that through the Ofsted reports, I guess. Shall I carry on?
Thanks, Wendy.
Okay, I told you it was long. Section 3, the effectiveness of the locally agreed syllabus. Well, that's appropriate at the moment, isn't it? So on to page 8. The strengths, that means in terms of our syllabus at the moment, is that we meet statutory requirements, taking time with the latest rewrite so that SACRE can take into account national updates. Remembering we talked about lost time due to the pandemic, and engaging with schools to help make decisions about the next agreed syllabus. I think we've always been good at that. But the barriers to success, guess what? Time. Though Gillian and I are hoping to have a whole day together in July, which is quite a luxury. But no, that's during the summer holidays. That's when we can pick up some of the time. And also the ever-changing situation. So you can literally be in the middle of producing, and I've been here, I've done lots and lots of agreed syllabuses, and you can literally be in the middle of producing something and they come out with something new. For example, like the research paper into RE in 2021, or a new Ofsted framework, and it steers then the way that you're thinking. I mean, we can't change that, and I don't know whether I'd go so far as to say it's a barrier, but it's just something that we always have to take into consideration. We have to kind of try and read the mind of Ofsted and think, what will the next emphasis be? What is it likely to be? Actually, to be honest with you, it's not usually that difficult to guess what's coming next. but there we are. So Chris, would be on that will be built into that action plan. Getting there. Now, section 4 is on collective worship. And page 9, I have put this, Jill, without asking you actually, that us and RE Advisor provide support for schools regarding collective worship. Put that because I think you're probably more likely to do it than I am.
Technically, it's my lovely colleague here.
Right.
It's not me at all, but yes, the diocese generally does provide that support.
So you're on it, so to speak, whereas I'm not on it.
So it's the lovely Lindsay.
Yeah. So again, back to lack of my time because I've got to concentrate on RE. That's not to say when I'm in schools, I do often ask about collective worship, but I have a lot of time to follow it up or do that much about it. And sometimes I'm invited to collective worship. So I'm not saying it doesn't happen at all, but it doesn't happen in a sort of systematic, organised way. Section 5, we're nearly there. Contribution of SACRE to promoting cohesion across the community. And the strengths have been our success in recruiting members from a range of faith communities over the past few years. If you could see what Sacre looked like when I joined, and it pains me to say that was about 15 years ago. No one here, I don't think. Oh, you there then, Chris. It was a very different group in terms of, you were, Mark. Yeah. It was different, wasn't it, in terms of its character and its makeup. But the barriers to success, of course, are that many areas of Lincolnshire do lack diversity, so it's harder for us to attract members from a range of faiths and communities. I mean by that it's harder than if we're in the middle of a multicultural city, but we've improved our profile in that respect. So yes, we need to keep Sacre informed of issues around community cohesion and constantly have to be aware that our Sacre represents, as far as possible, not only Lincolnshire but a broader society as well. So those barriers will form part of the action plan, and that will be presented to you at the next meeting. As I say, those what so-called barriers present a best fit out of what was a very, very cumbersome document to begin with. I think if we fed back anything to Nassaka, it would be, can you slim it down a bit next time you do it? Because I have a feeling some Sacres have been put off filling it in because it's so detailed. So, and that's... Any questions, Chris, if you want to take any final questions on that?
Thanks for that, Wendy. Any questions, colleagues? Cherry.
Is my microphone on? No.
Press it till
Is it now?
Goes red. Yes, it is.
Great,
now.
thank you. Thank you very much to Wendy, very much indeed, for taking this document to the next stage. And I absolutely agree with her, Mark, that you are usually our wonderful representative at the conference. We were hoping that perhaps when we come to the next item, we were hoping through this item to suggest that the conference next year actually has this as an item on the agenda, because it would be very interesting for all of us here to see what the feedback was from around the country. You know, how many local authorities, how many Sacres did actually, you know, provide information to their Sacres, how many Sacres actually engaged with this, and then how Nasacre, if you like, getting the feedback from Sacres. So we feel this is a very important document. We would like to actually have a bit more information from the Sacre about what the outcome is overall. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Cherry. Ashley.
I'd like to ask how this informs the action plan. The action plan will be at our next meeting. How does that then inform the agreed syllabus? And when is the agreed syllabus? Does it have to be updated regularly, or the one I've just pulled up off the internet is 2018 to 2023? Mm-hmm. Is that the right one? Mm. Okay, so December the 31st it runs out. We're without an agreed syllabus. Is that how it works?
You probably missed the last meeting or whatever. But I think it says in the minutes. But we did discuss this whole business about it being due this year. But we also recognised that when we introduced the syllabus, we weren't aware, nobody was aware, that the pandemic was coming. And that made it very difficult for schools to embed it and get used to it. We weren't working out it in schools. It was a really hard thing to do. So we asked Nassaka what the situation was for us. Could we defer a bit? And to cut a very long story short, they said, as long as you show us that you're beginning the process of review, because it's every 5 years, in 2023, that's okay. I mean, obviously, we're not going to take years and years to do it, but that's why we're starting it now rather than completing it now, because we took the view we'd rather take a bit longer. You know, in terms of the action plan will simply say that it's being done and give a tentative completion date. I think that's right. Yeah, that about right?
Yeah, we'd expect the agreed syllabus, the review syllabus, to be available for the academic year starting 2024.
Yeah.
So it's only a deferral of a year, but we are in the process of reviewing it now.
And it's a common thing. It's happening all over the place that people have put theirs off a little while because of the effect of the pandemic.
Thanks, Wendy. Yes, Amanda.
I just wonder if then thinking ahead, if we're also looking at opportunities of shared training opportunity, that if we were to launch the new agreed syllabus, that we could look at that as a shared event, as an invitation for SACRE inviting the schools. So we host it, but it also then becomes a workshop and training opportunity across the board. And if County Council had any further funds that they wished us to earmark, that could well be an opportunity, and it would be well used, because that would give us a heightened profile. It would give rigorous and robust response. You're obviously thinking about it already, Gillian.
Yes, Gillian.
Sorry, my mic has stopped working. We have actually decided within the Diocesan Education team for the first time in donkey's years to do an RE conference in summer term 2023, which would be 24, which would be around the right time. And having spoken with the SACREs of North and North East Links, which at the moment already use the Lincolnshire syllabus, they bought it from us essentially. They usually hold a summer conference, and I've asked them not to, so that we can combine with them. So it would make sense that if we actually had 3 joint authorities plus the diocese, that would be a real impactful event, I think.
Thanks for that, and thanks for that, Amanda. That's you seem to be moving ahead of the curve, which is good, isn't it? Thanks, Wendy. Moving on then, if everyone's happy, we'll move on to item 8. Mark's going to give us an update, and there is a written update that Mark has distributed on the NASACA National Conference.
Yeah, you've got the one without the photos, I'm afraid. There's a photo
Sorry
of
about that.
Charles Clark coming up to speak. And the other thing there's a photo of, actually, was these little freebies that they gave out to everybody who attended. Just simple little things, a pen and a drinks holder and a little bit of chocolate. But everybody in the group had one of those, so nice little thing. And that was because it was the 30th anniversary of NASACA, and so there were lots of reminiscences and such like, and I think there were only a few people there who'd been for the whole time. I was one of them, actually. I was at the first NASACA event many years ago, but it was at Fishmongers Hall, beautiful venue, and everybody was saying how wonderful that was, but as Charles Clark pointed out, with very sad memories of the events that happened. Was it about 2 years ago now? Something like that. So, yeah, just to think, yeah, that was happening here a couple of years ago. And Charles Clark made the very appropriate comment that you are, as SACREs, the one group in our society that's instituted for trying to bring about social cohesion. And there aren't any other sort of national groups that within the schools education sector that work with that kind of power, grassroots connections and such like. And saying that, we don't realise how important SACREs are and can be, and, the potential that they have for creating a community that's cohesive and that doesn't have the kind of violence that we saw on our television screens a few years ago. The summary document gives an overview of the various events of the day. It was a very busy day, lots and lots of speakers and small groups and various things that we went into. And there are actually 2 or 3 follow-up events for everybody that attended, online events. There was supposed to be one yesterday evening. It was cancelled at the last minute. And will be held again at some point in the future. So those, are sort of carrying on from this event into the future. The bit at the bottom of the page, and then on the left-hand side, going on to the second bit, David Hampshire, a former chairman of NASACA, has done several inputs before on summaries of those reports that we were talking about, that when we send our reports to the DFE and a copy to NASACA, saying that actually only half of the SACREs around the country have sent their reports in, 69 out of the 151. And one of the big questions is, what is the DFE doing to chase up those SACREs? It's a legal requirement to send a copy of it. Oh, that sounds interesting. Intriguing.
That sounded like something from Star Trek, didn't it?
Yeah, that's impressive, yeah. So that was quite interesting. The other fascinating bit, just at the end of that particular paragraph, there was one SACRE had 23 vacancies on the SACRE. I was thinking, wow, 23 is a lot of people. I don't think we even have 23 on ours. But they must have lots of different representatives that they're trying to get from all sorts of religious groups, presumably. He didn't break down where the vacancies are. But that's quite a horrific thought, because probably that SACRE is not able to make any formal decisions in the sense of being, what's the word for it? Sorry?
Functional?
Not functional, no, chorate. Because you need to have representatives from all the groups there in order to be chorate. And you need that in order to make decisions. The other interesting thing was a sort of an overview of the 30 years by David Metcalf, one of the founding members of NASACA. And just hearing the various events through the years and its ups and downs in terms of good and bad things. An interesting kind of review of what's gone on. Sadly, our chairman of the moment came down with COVID. I think it was the day before the conference, and so was not able to be there. But Paul Smalley, who is the former chairman of NASACA, was able to lead things on and look after the chairing of the event. But it was a great day, wonderful lunch, very nice buffet lunch. Yeah, it's worth going for that. And happy to answer any questions if people have.
And can I thank Mark for yet again representing us at National NASACA. I went with him one year, and I concur. That was before COVID, wasn't it? And it was a really thought-provoking event, and clearly this has been equally thought-provoking. I'm pleased about the dinner as well. Questions to Mark? Yes, Jackie.
Thanks. A comment as well, if I may. I didn't know Charles Clarke was still around. I went to hear him speak when he was Education Secretary, and he was one of the few politicians. I used to go and listen to anybody from any party, and he was one of the few who actually answered the questions. You answered a question, you'd say, will you do this? No. Will you do that? Yes. And I thought that was brilliant. The only thing he did, out of interest, was he seeded a lot of his people amongst the audience to hear what we were saying about him while he was speaking. And they were so obvious, but he was quite brilliant. I've got a lot of time for him, actually. The one thing I wanted to raise, and I don't know if this is the appropriate time, but I did want to bring it up at some point today, which is Scampton. And the reason I want to raise that was SACRE's role for community cohesion. We're going to have an awful lot of Muslims in, and I'm not sure. I know they're talking about health provision and all the rest of it, and we don't know who or where, whether they will stay, so it's all up in the air. But we do know that there are likely to be some who are underage. What I'm not getting is information about spiritual welfare. So I don't know if that is something we look at. It is so up in the air at the moment, and with the court case going ahead on July the 12th and 13th. But certainly the thought is that there will be anything up to about 300, perhaps less, perhaps fewer, not less, sorry, fewer. But it's something perhaps as a group we need to be aware of, if that's okay, Chair.
I'm grateful, Jackie. I'll just mention I am aware of discussions that are taking place among the churches. and I'm conscious that I'm live on air, so I need to be careful what I say, but there is quiet discussions taking place among the churches and other groups to try and provide support. And I think Sean's happy to say something. Thanks, Sean.
Yeah, so we've been part of those conversations, which we've been having quite a lot of conversations under the radar, obviously, because it's very politically hot. I know that the imam at the mosque has been part of those conversations as well. So yeah, we've the spiritual aspect is being thought through. I don't know what's public knowledge yet or not as to there's a large amount of people obviously coming to Scampton. They're starting with, I think, 500 in the next few months, and then building up to 1,500 to 2,000. But yeah, there's a good number of Christians around the table, but also our Muslim friends as well, which is really great. So having that conversation is important.
I'm very grateful to Sean, and I would encourage informal discussions after the meeting as well, because I think that would be good.
Chair, sorry, can I just respond there?
Yes, Julian.
Obviously, the business of Sacre is RE and collective worship. So our agreed syllabus already, which is in use in the local authority schools in and around Scampton already, focuses on Christian, Muslim and Hindu worldviews in depth. Teachers know where they can go to get support with that. The imam and the local Muslim community are regular visitors in schools, and if there are any issues around collective worship, if there are young people joining schools, that would then come to us in the form of determinations. But I would suggest it would be unlikely that there would be such a high proportion of Muslim pupils in an individual school that a determination needed to be made.
Thanks for that, Julian. Thanks for that, Jackie. I know that you are all, one way or another, engaged positively to be supportive. And I know in our different roles we'll be engaged. Thanks. Coming back to you, Mark. Further questions for Mark? Yes, Cherry.
Could I just repeat that if they could, at the next year's meeting, discuss the self-assessment from local authorities? Thank you. From SACRAs.
Is that best as a question or a request from the SACRA rather than from me as an individual member?
Yes,
yeah.
It was just making sure that we knew how to do that. Thank you, Mark.
So that'll be in the minutes, and that will spur us on. Thanks for that, Cherry. Thanks, Mark. Any other questions for Mark? Well, thanks very much, Mark, once again, and I hope more of us can. I hope more of us can join you next year. That's a kind of hint. Thank you. So moving on to item 9, agreed syllabus updates. That is Gillian.
I think it's Wendy.
Sorry, Wendy.
Well, it's kind of both of us really, but I think we've actually covered quite a lot during the process of the meeting. Just to say it's in hand. We're having an important day in July where we'll try and get to grips with what the framework of a revised syllabus would look like, and then we'll be able to come back to you in November with a lot more detail. I don't think there's really much more to say than that at the moment, is there, Jill?
I don't know at what point we need to actually establish the agreed syllabus conference.
Probably from November, when we've got substance. When you review an agreed syllabus, the statutory requirements are every 5 years, and the requirements are also that you set up something called an agreed syllabus conference, which sounds a bit grand. It sounds like 1,000 people in a hall, but it's actually us. It can be the whole SACRA, or it can be a group of members of SACRA, and their job is to, really it's to provide checks and balances for the syllabus. And you can do it one of two ways, really. You can either have an additional meeting at the end of every SACRA meeting, but the meeting changes character, as it were. So you have your agenda like this. The meeting is closed, and then the chair says, now we're having the agreed syllabus conference. And the membership discusses just that, what's going on with the agreed syllabus. Or you have a group of people who have a particular interest in the syllabus. I think that's what we did last time, actually. and they meet separately to discuss the progress of the syllabus, but they're still called the Agreed Syllabus Conference. So we may contact members before November about the way in which they want to proceed with that, but that's how it works anyway.
For clarification, it may be worth saying part of the reasoning for that, if it doesn't make sense, is that Agreed Syllabus Conference can invite other people, teachers and parents, or any other group, advisors or anybody else who can help in the process, which is why you have that sort of separation of the two.
Thanks for that, Julian. Thanks for that, Mark and colleagues. So we will undoubtedly be coming back to that to decide which approach. So if you'd all like to think about how we do that. And am I at, I think I lost my place there, 11 Dyson update? SIAMS, sorry, item 10, SIAMS inspections, Gillian.
Right, well, there's been a lot of them. That's the main message. We have 5 running this week. This is a knock-on effect of the pause of inspections during the pandemic and the fact that the emergency legislation that extends the lifespan between inspections is about to end. So there is an almighty rush to get through the list. I have got a document that I can send round to committee members in due course, but just to say that at this point in time, the SIAMS inspection, which is an inspection of Church of England and Methodist schools, is pertinent to us insofar as it references both RE and collective worship in many of those schools which continue to be local authority maintained schools. We have no school that has been graded less than good. We have a handful that have been graded excellent, including some that have had a specifically excellent grade for collective worship. RE tends not to get a separate grade unless it is a particular type of church school, a voluntary aided church school, and I don't believe we've had any voluntary aided schools actually inspected, so we wouldn't expect to have those separate gradings for RE, but within that broader overall grade of good or excellent, the RE would be mentioned. I'm happy to take any questions on SIAMS inspection.
Okay, colleagues, thanks for that, Gillian. I think you've got the next spot as well, diocesan update.
Thank you. Just to essentially say, as you have in the pack, I'm continuing the day job. Wendy and I are continuing our discussions on the Agreed Syllabus Review. I continue to be supporting schools across the region of all different types. I have a particular focus on secondary schools at the moment. I think there is a real national concern about what RE looks like across the secondary sector. The statistics on recruitment and retention of subject specialist teachers are frankly horrifying, which we did touch on in our last meeting, but they have got worse since then. So we do have a considerable implication there for the young people of this region who move into secondary schools and are not able to access what we might consider to be an entitlement to a high quality of religious education. So continue to work with colleagues nationally on that, as well as working on the Empowering Voices project in this region, which looks at diversity within religious and non-religious worldviews, and the Worldviews project, which is a national project that is working with a draft national statement of entitlement that should provide some degree of consistency. That is a document that Wendy and I will be at least referring to, looking at when we think about the Agreed Syllabus Review. So we are essentially trialling that through the Worldviews project. I'm leading a team of teachers across England who are working on that particular thing. Again, happy to answer any questions on any of that.
Okay, colleagues, thanks very much for that, Gillian. Moving on to item 12, analysis of Ofsted reports with Wendy.
Thank you. This is quite a long document, so I'll just draw your attention to some points in it. I think probably one of the most important things is to explain which each column means. This is agenda item 12. I'm starting at page 1. So obviously on the left-hand column you've got the school, the date that the inspection took place, This is in alphabetical order, not in chronological order, so just to make that point. Also tells you which type of inspection it is, and this will be in either a Section 8 inspection, which is an ungraded inspection, where schools have been in the past graded as good, and that's why it says remains good, or a Section 5 inspection, where they can be given a number of categories. That'll be made clear when you look at the comments. I won't worry too much about those, but bear in mind that that's the overall outcome of effectiveness for the school. It does not refer to RE. It does give you a kind of context. So in other words, if a school is good or outstanding and RE was poor, then you'd be quite concerned about that, because it gives the whole context of the school, and you can see RE within that context. Now, speaking of RE, we no longer get separate subject reports for RE, and it tends to be written about under personal development in Ofsted inspections, along with spiritual, moral, social and cultural development and British values. And that's why those three things are together at the top, because Ofsted lumped them together. The deep dive is the interrogation of certain subjects on the curriculum. You see straight away looking at this, can't you, that there are not many for RE. I've no idea if anyone's done a whole trawl of Ofsted reports to see how many RE deep dives there are. I notice that certain subjects come up now and again, but I haven't done a deep analysis of that. But anyway, where it says no, that means no deep dive in RE. But that is not to say that they're not going to look at SMSC, British values, and by implication, some of RE. So, for example, in the first school on the list, you will see that it's mentioned there that the pupils' knowledge of different faiths and beliefs is strong. Even though it wasn't a deep dive, inspectors have still picked that up. Now, as you go through the report, you'll see there are times when they have pulled out issues about RE that are not so strong. So, for example, on page 1, Boxton and Syston C Primary School, second one down, it says it gives you a good bit. It says they've got opportunities to learn about different faiths through the curriculum, etc. However, that's a favourite word of Ofsted. However, leaders have not ensured that pupils have opportunities to fully learn about diversity and equality, and they are not as well prepared as they need to be for life in modern Britain. So it's framed it around British values rather than RE. Chair, were members given a colour version of this? Because it's got highlights, so that makes it a lot easier.
I think that everybody had it by email. I don't think anybody's had any paper copies, have they?
No, but was it? Yeah, because...
Yes, mine's in colour and I took it off the internet.
I've sometimes sat here chatting away about things and someone said, actually, we haven't got the highlighter bits, we don't know what you're talking about. So as you go through it, you will see the red text is where there are issues. You'll see on page 2 that Colsterworth did have a deep dive in RE, and it found that they have a good understanding of Christianity and of different cultures. But then, however, some pupils' knowledge of different faiths is inconsistent. Although they know how to respect difference, they are not as aware as they should be of different faiths. Leaders should ensure that pupils have the necessary knowledge and understanding of different faiths to prepare them for life in modern Britain. And so it goes on. You can ask some questions in a minute, but the ones that drive me absolutely mad are like on page 4, if you look at page 4, when you get Fulstow Community Primary School. Have a look at that comment. What on earth use is that? Pupils learn about world faiths and cultures. The only response to that, possible response to that is, so what? It's a descriptive term. We want to know impact. We want to know, well, and what impact has that had on the children? So, that's not really helping as much, is it? Just telling us that learn about it. We don't know. You can see from that, can't you? Yet again, the inconsistency in reporting. I'll take a question now if you...
Gillian, and then Ashley.
I just want to remind members, we discussed this in the previous meeting. There is some anecdotal evidence that our locally agreed syllabus is not helping in this regard, and that there are some Ofsted inspectors who assume that what RE ought to look like is what I call the greatest hits of the big six.
Yeah.
So that when they discover that children are not, for example, learning about Sikhism in depth as part of the RE curriculum, they assume that children are not being appropriately prepared for life in modern Britain.
Good point.
In that instance, we are trying to encourage school leaders to direct the inspector towards their own RE research review, which cites the fact that a light touch surface covering of 6 major world faiths and nothing else is not good quality RE. And if it is a requirement under Ofsted inspection that British values equals learning the greatest hits of the big six, then school leaders will need to consider where else across the life of the school they may be able to reference, for example, Sikhism, where it is not a requirement of the locally agreed syllabus. I am confident, and I know Wendy is as well, that our locally agreed syllabus meets the expectations of the Ofsted RE Research Review, and we perhaps need our school leaders and RE leaders to feel confident enough to articulate that if they are challenged by an Ofsted inspector. Of course, we have to remember our Ofsted inspectors are very, very rarely RE subject specialists. So if what they have always experienced in their own professional practice is the greatest hits of the big six, then that is what they will be looking for, and that may unjustifiably penalise some of our schools.
Can I just take other questions and then come
Can I
back?
just respond to that one? But yeah, I think that's a really good point, and that in part explains the inconsistency in some of these comments. We've had a similar situation. I sit on Sacre and Leicester. We've had a very similar situation where we've had a problem with schools getting comments like they're not teaching a well-balanced, curriculum in terms of Abrahamic and Dharmic faiths. And that's something that we know we have to attend to, but it's not something that necessarily that the non-specialist in school who's facing an inspector knows. And they've thrown some of our teachers, and it has been quite tricky for us. They've also asked them in detail about the research review, and some of them have been, understandably, not completely comfortable with that. So we have got issues. Ofsted, the crib sheets were leaked about a year ago, the crib sheets that inspectors use for RE. And I mean, they're just crazy, really, when you look at those. And some schools, horror of horrors, have printed these off and given them to heads of departments and subject leaders, which has only confused things even more, because they've then taken them as this is what an Ofsted inspector is going to ask us, and they're simply not for that purpose. So that's another issue we've got as well.
I think we're trying to be proactive here. So one of my jobs across all 3 authorities that I work with is to actually look at these excerpts from Ofsted reports and try to speak to some of the schools to better understand what questions they were actually asked that led to that statement being recorded in a report, so that I can go back to Richard Quay, who's the national lead for RE at Ofsted, and just point out that there is sufficient anecdotal evidence that he might need to do a bit of extra training with his Ofsted inspectors in relation to RE.
Thanks, Gillian. Ashley.
Yeah, I think the column 5, which are the direct quotes from Ofsted reports, are a bundle of anecdotal evidence, aren't they? When we talk about, you mentioned Fulstow, pupils learn about world faiths and cultures. The one above, although there's some extra text, has a sentence, they understand diversity. Well, I hope that by the end of my life I've achieved what Fleetwood Lane School kids have done in understanding diversity. It's a pretty sweeping statement. Obviously we're not here to comment on the way that Ofsted is delivered, and the whole Ofsted process is a much bigger debate than in this room. But in terms of our trying to understand what Ofsted is generally saying about schools in Lincolnshire, it is quite hard when it gets lumped together with, I guess, citizenship and relationships education and so on? Because if Ofsted says they understand diversity, well, have they got that from RE lessons, or have they got it from PSHE, or have they got it just from the general school culture? It's impossible to say. I know we're kind of grasping at any straw that gives us feedback from the Ofsted process, but I don't know how much we can gather from that, except where you get more detailed, in-depth comments or particular comments which relate directly to our RE.
I think it gives us a flavour of what's happened and what's happening. And in the past, where schools have appeared, you know, as you've got the red text, where it seems that there is a bit of an issue over learning about different faiths. For example, we have responded to that by contacting the school and saying, we've seen this in your Ofsted report, do you want any support with this? And 9 times out of 10, they've said yes. So actually, it has been very useful in terms of its impact and what we've been able to do in schools. In terms of usefulness for Ofsted, again, it has been very useful because in the past Ofsted has invited comments about its reports, and certainly some of you remember Neville, when he was the chair, spent half his life responding to Ofsted and giving feedback from Lincolnshire Sacre and saying, you've put this in your report, and so on and so forth. So years ago, we had separate subject reports for RE, and I was sitting here giving very detailed reports about RE. And over the years, the amount of RE has got smaller and smaller. And as I say, it's now sucked into these other things, which, as you say, it's impossible for us to pick up. And to be honest, even when you read the report, that's impossible to do. But this is all we have from Ofsted at the moment. And it does give us some idea of the general picture, especially if there is a deep dive. And the other thing I was going to say, one source of evidence that Ofsted looked for, which worries me slightly, and a lot of you will know why, is interviewing pupils. And Ofsted use this a lot, and they put quite a lot of weight on it. Well, some inspectors do. So, for example, on Inglesby Academy on page 5, it says, some pupils are not always able to recall their learning of fundamental British values. Well, blow me down, I would have never... pupils are not always able to remember lots of things, and I think Ofsted have had to rethink a bit the way they're taking that as a source of evidence. I mean, I don't know about those of you who've got children. When my daughter was tiny and she came home from school, I'd frequently say, so what have you done in school today? And the answer 9 times out of 10 was nothing. And I would say, well, you must have done something. No. So when you ask children, and I do a lot of work with children, talking to them, they often say, well, we don't do any maths. Of course you do. And we did spot a few years ago that a lot of children didn't actually know what RE meant. What's RE? Oh, it's topic. You mean topic. So there you are.
Can I just let Jennifer in?
Yep. Sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what Gillian was saying. We're just rewriting our curriculum, doing quite an overhaul, and obviously looking at the agreed syllabus, making sure we've covered everything that's in there. And I'm doing it as part of a Farmington research, and I did speak to Richard Quay last year and said, my worry is on 5% curriculum time, which is very limited, I can't do justice to everything. Your report says, that's not necessarily good RE, and just had it from him, I knew we were expecting the inspectors to come in, which they did, but they didn't come and do any deep dive in our subject. But I was all ready to quote Richard back at them if they were going to say, we don't cover all the sick, because we don't have time to do it and do it justice.
Exactly.
Thanks, Jennifer. Any other questions of, yes, Mark?
Just a comment on that. I mean, the one above Inglesby.
What page is it, please?
Yeah, on the comments, the one above Inglesby Academy on page 47, Helmswell Cliff. Its overall effectiveness is good, but they've made no comments. So at least you thought, at least, tell us why you thought its overall effectiveness was good. You know what I mean?
Well, because they've probably got stunning results in the SATs. Yeah, maths and English.
Right.
I'll just throw that out there. That might have driven that. And no specific doesn't mean it's bad. It just means they chose not to make any specific comments
Oh, right.
on our
That's weird.
SMS. They should have done.
Yeah.
They absolutely should have. But the overall effect, I'll bet you it's to do with their Wendy happens.
All right.
I'm pretty sure that that would have been to do with outcomes and SATs.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Wendy. Cherry.
I mean, obviously we're looking at something very specific here. We're not looking at the whole picture. We're not reading the whole Ofsted report. And therefore, when we're looking at a school that's been graded good, if you read the whole of the report, you would find many, many areas of the school that were good. And they'd say, although there would be these sentences, they would say why the school was good. So, as I say, I think we've got to be terribly careful about focusing on the negative, because if you look at this document, there's not an awful lot in red. So I think the first thing is that when we look through this report, we look through at what isn't red and celebrate that. And yes, it is important to analyse those areas that are red, but I think that what Gillian said was hugely important, and Wendy, that you go back and you ask those teachers in those schools what questions were asked. And that's what Jennifer was implying, that she'd already thought about that. But ask what questions were asked, what led to that. And I think that will be hugely important. And we've talked about our syllabus not being able to cover all of our major faiths. And of course, there is deep understanding why that is the case. And certainly Jennifer is explaining it herself. But that doesn't mean to say that what we've got to do in all our schools is that make our young people aware of all of those faiths, of the love and the respect and the care within those faiths. So just because they're not included within that syllabus doesn't mean that it's not hugely important to have them reflected within our schools, and that young people can actually talk about that and discuss that. So I think that's hugely important.
Thanks, Cherry. Thanks, Wendy, for that. I think we're now on item 13, update from the local authority advisor.
Thank you. Just to give you a quick flavour, I was saying earlier about constraints of time, but within those constraints, over the past few weeks, I have provided specific support for the following schools. I mean, I do quite a lot of support for schools via email that I don't necessarily list. That just happens all the time. So schools may say, this is our long-term plan for RE, will you have a look at it? I'm sure Jill gets much the same kind of thing that goes on almost all the time, really. And that's when I was talking about emails and admin, that's something that does take up quite a lot of time. And sometimes that's also followed up with Zoom meetings to talk about what they've sent. So quite a lot of stuff goes on online these days, especially since the pandemic. But at the beginning of term, I did, interestingly, following our early discussion, I did half a day at Scampton where they wanted training on teaching about different religions with an emphasis on Islam. So that's quite interesting because we were talking about Scampton earlier, weren't we? And I also did 2 full days at Crowland, Southview Primary, where they wanted an emphasis on teachers planning and having a look at some lessons, which was really good to have 2 full days to do that in detail. And in the middle of those 2 days, a staff meeting on, again, teaching about Islam. So that was quite a busy start to the term. And also gave support to St Gilbert's Church of England Primary over Zoom. And am I hearing things? sorry. And worked with Belmont Community Primary School, Donington-on-Bain Primary School, who are redesigning their curriculum, half day there, and Metheringham and Wellbourne. So there are a few schools that I've worked with in person, and all of those have been at least half a day, most of them a day or even 2 days. Now, interesting that one of those schools that I mentioned had brought in the Discovery RE scheme, which we've talked about before, if you may recall. And you may also remember that it's quite a costly scheme. Well, the head teacher brought this scheme in to solve their problems for RE, but then appointed a new RE subject lead who then had to adapt it to the agreed syllabus and couldn't. So then had to have me in for 2 days to help work with them to adapt that scheme. And I think that kind of proves a bit of what we were saying, that as a scheme, you can take something off the shelf, But if you want to adapt it to an agreed syllabus, it is actually quite complex, and certainly the subject lead in that school couldn't do it. So now they're running a separate thing. They've got Discovery RE, but there they've got another layer on top of it, which is the planning that links the Discovery RE to the syllabus. So it's been that was quite challenging work, really. And the staff, in terms of planning, were saying to me, I don't know which bits we're doing now. I'm not quite sure. So I am always saying to schools, and I know Jill is the same, beware whatever scheme you're using. And I would say that in any subject of the curriculum, because one of the questions that Ofsted will ask you, whether it's kapow in music or jigsaw in PSHE or whatever, they will say, how are you adapting it to meet the needs of your pupils? You cannot just take things like this and teach them. So I think it's true to say we're back on track with face-to-face training. A lot of schools are saying come in, but at the same time I think we're also benefiting now from Zoom and Teams and being able to catch up with people, whereas before we just wouldn't have had the time. So I want to put a positive spin on that. When I talk about constraints on time, I'm also pleased that we're still using, I never thought I'd say this, we're still using Zoom and Teams, because although I hate it, because I'd much prefer to be face-to-face with people, I do see the benefit it brings. And I think it's brought me into contact with loads more schools than I would have had time to do without it. So I think that's great. But it's been a good balance, both of being in school and sitting looking at the computer. So be assured that schools are getting the support that they need. Thanks for that, Wendy. And do I have any questions, please? Or are you all? You've all worked very hard today. It's been quite a good, I think, good discussive, reflective, intelligent meeting, and I'm grateful to all of you for that. Before I move to item 4, is it in order to congratulate Ashley on his election without being in any way political? Or am I wrong? Were you not Southcote Stephen elected? Did I get that wrong?
Lots of us have been elected. Mark was re-elected, and people across the county have been elected. If you're referring to my promotion, so to speak, then thank you very much.
I might have committed a political faux pas. Yeah. Thank you, Jackie. Well, congratulations anyway then. And thank you, everybody. Item 14, reflections at the next meeting. Could I have a willing volunteer to do a reflection? Thank you, Jennifer, for today. Thank you. Thank you, Sean.
I was meant to do it a few months ago, but I wasn't able to make the meeting, so I'm really happy to do it this next time. In November, I think it is, isn't it?
Next meeting is the 14th of November. Thanks very much for that, Sean. That does take me to item 15, which is the future meeting dates, which I would ask you to note, please. And item 16, as Sean has reminded us, date of the next meeting, 14th of November. If there's no further... Oh, there is.
Sorry.
Cherry.
It was just to remind everybody that if you need to claim for your expenses, or you want to claim for the expenses, your travel expenses, then just ask Emily and she will send you that form.
Thanks very much for that, Cherry. I won't be claiming any because I only come from Colgrave Street in Lincoln. Thanks very much, everybody. Most grateful. Do have a good rest of your day, please.